Good evening. Welcome to WebYeshiva. I'm Avraham Shira. We've got some really interesting stuff here tonight to deal with numbers, what are numbers, how they relate to the Haggadah. The Haggadah, of course, being the rabbi's creation of the story of the Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, but it's all bound. If we look at it close enough from enough angles, we're going to see that there's a language of numbers that emerges from the Haggadah. We're not going to be able to cover it that well in 2 weeks, but it's something fascinating to see. Now, the first thing that we're going to ask is some questions about numbers and try to answer them, because when we learn about what numbers really are on a intellectual and a mental and a psychic level, a neshama level, we see that there's a lot to learn. So the first question, what are numbers? Well, what are numbers? They're shapes. Shapes that are made on paper or on walls or in the sand at the beach. They're shapes and they represent things. So that makes them not just shapes, they're symbols. And what are they symbols of? Well, they're symbols of quantities, values. And those values can be used or applied in endless amounts of applications. Of course, there's the idea of the quantities of space, the quantities of things, the quantities of money. Of course, money are things. We have the quantities of liquids, quantities of metals. There is an endless application of counting things. Now, why do we count things? Why do we have these symbols of quantity? Well, of course, in order to be able to weigh the value of an item. Because weighing the value of an item is an essential skill in the world that we live in. Now, if you ever noticed, I have, Baruch Hashem, some grandchildren, and you try to give them some money, they have no clue what it is if they're too young. There's a certain point where the mind of the child grasps something about money, that this thing here, this coin, this bill can buy me something in in the candy store. But before that, they look at it, they don't, it's nothing to them. And so you see that there is a transition in the human mind about numbers where they don't represent anything to suddenly they represent quite a bit. And there are many numbering systems throughout history. But this power of assessing the value of a thing, assessing the weight of a thing, assessing the height of a thing, all these estimations of the mind are vague until we can put a number on them. So numbers, what they do is they facilitate our accuracy of perception. That it's just not a bottle of water, it's a liter and a half of water. And that my truck that's going underneath the interstate is not 5 meters high, it's 5.5 meters high, and I better stop before I hit that bridge. And so on and so forth. So we learn the value of numbers as we expand our experience in the world. And so the symbols are no longer just symbols, they're much more concrete. And when you think of a number, ask yourself, well, what am I applying this number to? The distance of the Earth to the sun, 93 million miles, that's a number. It's a very famous number in the science world. And so on and so forth. Our memories then start to collect numbers. And so the numbers become addresses in our mind for ideas, like the distance to the sun. But when you see that you're starting to build up a memory bank of ideas based on numbers, you have a data bank to refer to. So numbers are one of the ways that we build a data bank. Now, the rabbis make a statement, a very important statement. They say, Im ein havdalah, if there is no power of distinction, lahavdil, to make a separation, as it says in the beginning of creation story, havdil mayim ben mayim. God made a separation in the waters. And that became, of course, the Maim Elyonim, the Maim Tachtonim. It could be interpreted as the spiritual realm and the physical realm, which is one way and one level. Another way in the more pshat level is the atmosphere and the oceans of the earth. But the idea that we're talking about is the power of making distinctions. And this is obviously necessary for our development. So the child will learn that this piece of paper will buy me candy, but they don't know how many pieces of candy they can buy with this piece of paper. As they get older, they start to calculate, they start to understand, wow, this paper will buy me a lot of candy. And this coin won't buy me so much candy. So your kid says, here, you take the coin, I'll take the paper. So, but they say, Im ein havdalah minaim dat. How are you going to have dot? Now, dot, of course, means knowledge, but it's also useful knowledge. It's the application of knowledge. It's information, but it's also consciousness is created by the union of chokhmah and bina, wisdom and understanding, create dot in the mind. So dot is much more than just simple knowledge. It's the ability to weigh and to understand and to categorize knowledge. And the categorizing of knowledge is one of the important things that we do to continue our development as human beings. So dot is this ability not just to know things, but to weigh them and to understand and pay attention to the distinctions of things. Now, numbers, of course, they are vessels for measuring the physical world that we know, but they're also gateways of ideas, because when you know the Hebrew equivalent of a number, in other words, you know there's a number called 13, and you say, well, yeah, 13, I've seen that in the Siddur. They have 13 attributes of mercy. Isn't that interesting? What are those 13 attributes of mercy? And so the number 13 becomes an address for a concept, but many concepts can attach to the same number. So the word ahava is also 13, gematria of those 13 attributes of midah. So we now see that ahava and the attributes of mercy are obviously connected, because they both run through the same gateway, the number 13. And it's the same with all numbers, especially in the numbers of the Haggadah of Pesach. Now, so when we think about numbers, there are innumerable applications. When you ask somebody how old they are you asking for a number? Is that really what you're asking for? If you're working a company and you hire people and you ask them how old they are, you're not really interested in the number. You're interested in what the number represents, how long they've been working, how long they have left to work, how mature they are, how much life experience do they have. And so you see that the number now represents many other things that are very pertinent and important to us. On a Kabbalistic level, the numbers not only represent letters and collections of letters we call words, the numbers are also gateways for God's name. And he has many names, and each name has its own number. So now those numbers become even more special, like the number 26, which is the gematria of Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. That most transcendent of all names, that most inclusive of all names, the name that we can't even say out loud without causing problems above and below. You know, the Arizal writes that when you calling God's name is like shaking a little twig on one side of a great tree, like an oak tree. The whole tree will vibrate when you pull that twig, even though it's a giant tree. You might not be able to measure the vibration unless you have a super sensitive measuring device. But the interconnectedness of God's names with creation is part of what the Kabbalah studies. And so when you know God's names, Yud Kei Vav Kei and Adonai and Shaddai and all the names, there are many, and we're not going to say them all here. But when you know the names, and you learn their numbers, then all of a sudden the numbers become sanctified. The numbers become hallowed in our memory, and that creates a transcendental space in the mind. Why? Because the number's holy. Well, the number's only made holy by the concepts that it represents. So are the concepts holy? Well, God's name is holy. And that means the concept of it in your mind, the idea of it in your mind, carries some of that holiness. The name Jerusalem should conjure the idea of the holy city. So when you learn about the name of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, they will see peace, or the idea of complete awe, because the letters of the word Yerushalayim also represent those concepts. So we're not only are we connecting numbers with letters and ideas, we're connecting numbers with a place above place, with a time above time, which is of course our creator in the heavenly realm. Also on the level of numbers, we have the idea of the 12 months. That creates a calendar. That creates a time in the yearly cycle. Can you imagine living on a planet that didn't have a yearly cycle? That didn't have every year at this time we have Pesach. Every year at this time we have Shavuot. Every year at this time we have Rosh Hashanah. Can you imagine living on a planet that's just off to the races, flashing around the universe, without ever having a cyclical pattern? What would that be like? Imagine. Where are we going today, honey? Well, we're going to pass the Milky Way. It's a small galaxy, but we'll pass by. We'll wave on the way to the next galaxy. Life would lack cyclical significance, and cyclical significance is built into our calendar in a very deep way, because many famous things happen to the Jewish people throughout the yearly calendar, and so we always come back to them. And that cyclicality, if you will, creates a pattern that we can grasp and live by, and know that, oh, it's Pesach. That means it's spring. Oh, that means I have to plant my tulips. Oh, that means my kids are coming for Leila Seder. Oh, well, I got to go buy 50 kilos of matzah. And so on and so forth. So we see these numbers are creating patterns in the mind, and they're creating organizational principles to work with. When you look in your wallet and you see $20, more, forget about plastic money and all the other kinds. You know that you have $20 of buying power. So that's going to make you very selective about what you're going to buy when you go to the store. If you don't know the value and the weight of money, and you don't know what you need, and you don't know how much what you need is going to cost, you're going to be lost when you go in the store. But numbers give us the ability to be precise with reality, because numbers are very cut and dry, very clear, very accurate in what they want to represent. Now, with a calendar, we also have a way to measure our lives, how old we are, how long we've been doing something. That represents commitment. That represents stability, which is the qualities that we want to share in the world, the qualities that the world needs. Without numbers, how can I tell you that I've been doing this for 30 years? How is that meaningful to you that someone's been doing something for 30 years? But obviously, hopefully you're going to trust somebody who's been doing something for 30 years than somebody who's doing it for 3 years or 3 months. Let's say. But perhaps one of the great ideas about numbers is it helps us measure power. You know that your tires hold, say, 50 pounds per square inch of air pressure. You don't want to pump them up more than that, or you're gonna get a blowout, God forbid, on the highway. That's power. You know that if someone leaves you a Bitcoin in an inheritance, then you got to go look up the value of the Bitcoin at any one time. That's power. At least, well, it's still power. We'll see how long that lasts. We have to joke about the a little bit at least about the financial markets because a lot of these things are based on human contraptions of creating value, but not from product. They create value through consensus of value. When people agree that Bitcoin is worth something, then they all get in there and agree about it together. They have like a consortium. A kilo of wheat is worth something anywhere you go. And a Bitcoin might be worth $18,000, but if you don't go to a place where they trade in Bitcoin, it's worthless. So numbers give us the ability to express power. You know that a rocket has a certain amount of thrust to make it leave the atmosphere. That's power. A bullet from a rifle travels at 1,200 miles an hour, and so on and so forth. Again, it represents power. If this man's a billionaire, he represents a certain amount of power. And when we can weigh power, then we can make even better decisions in the world. And so all of these things that we kind of take for granted because we learn them growing up as kids and as students and elementary, junior high, high school, college, post postgraduate degrees, even yeshiva, believe it or not. Some of the greatest, most difficult mathematic equations are found in the Talmud. So we have to respect numbers. We understand that they're vessels of understanding, and they gather other concepts to them by their interconnection of the number itself. Now, with all that said, let's make a little jump and go to a couple of numbers in the Haggadah. Of course, one of the most famous numbers in the Haggadah is 4. The 4 cups of wine that we drink on Pesach. Those 4 cups of wine are comparable to, I should say, really representative of 4 levels of mental development in a human being. This is what the Arizal teaches us. They're called Mochin de Katnut 1 and 2, Mochin de Gadlut 1 and 2. Now, Mochin means mind, power, and Gadlut means great, and Katnu means small. So what the 4 cups of wine represent are 4 stages in the expansion of the human mind. And it's not by chance that wine is this substance that can give you expanded consciousness of God. And yet it can also destroy our mind a little bit too much at the wrong time in the wrong place and maybe on an empty stomach. So understand that the 4 in the Haggadah is representing not only the 4 cups, the 4 stages of expansion of the mind. And what are we doing there on Pesach? We're celebrating the Jewish people coming out of Egypt. They're expanding as a people into the state of freedom. And to have freedom, we need to leave our old mental power. And so this is what the Kabbalah teaches us, that on Leila Seder, we are given those lights by virtue of just keeping the Seder. We are given lights on Shabbat. New layers of the soul are returned to us on Shabbat that were lost at the head of Egel, right? The golden calf. We lost mental power. We lost expanded consciousness. We fell into the fear of the here and now, the fear of loss of Moses, the fear of being in the desert. There's some good fears out there, in the desert, but still, on the night of the Seder, we get those mental powers back, and they come in stages through each cup of wine. So Rabbi Nachman says, only a tzaddik, a righteous person, can really drink properly for the right reasons, for that expanded consciousness. And we're going to define expanded consciousness right now as the recognition of the greatness of God. And that, of course, has no number. There's no scale. Well, I just scored 100 on my vision of the greatness of God. Oh, 100, that's nothing. I had 1,000 on my scale of the vision of the greatness of God, and so on and so forth. You see, it's an impossibility. We're talking about an infinite experience. And each human being, 8 billion people, are going to have their own experience of that greatness and their ability to hold it. But the idea of the wine is that if we expand our mind, we can hold more. We can see more. We can experience something of the greatness of Hashem, bringing the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses out of the desert, going towards this huge goal, this wondrous goal called, the land of milk and honey, Eretz Israel. Now, of course, the number 4 also represents the 4 directions of the planet: north, south, east, and west. The number 4 is represented by which letter? The Dalet. Dalet is almost the same word as Dalet or Delet, a door. So the 4 is this idea of a doorway. What is a doorway? Well, it's a space that you pass through from one area to another. And each area has its own definition, its own energy, its own value. When you pass through the door from your bedroom into the bathroom, it's not a very big transition. But when you pass through the vault in the bank from, inside the vault to outside the vault, it's a pretty big transition. When you walk through the Shar Yaffo, the gate of Yaffo in Jerusalem, you feel the difference. I promise you, you have to be a stone not to feel something changed when you walk through that gate, because you're walking from outside the old city into the old city, the holy city, the place where they did not even allow dead to people to stay. They were moved outside those walls because of the purity of the Mikdash and the purity of the Kohanim. And you won't find anybody buried in the old city till this day. So the number 4 also represents the 4 sons: the wise son, the foolish son, the evil son, and the one that doesn't even know how to ask a question. So those 4 sons also represent 4 levels of development in a human being. And of course, the Hasidic masters teach us that all 4 are really inside us. That even though you're 62 years old or 22 years old, you're carrying a little bit of each of those 4 sons. So that's another representation of the 4 in the Haggadah. Another number that we interact with on a regular basis, of course, on Pesach and Leila Seder especially, is the number 7, which is chiefly represented in the 7 items on the Seder plate. Of course, those 7 items represent events and feelings and experiences that we as a collective people went through on the first Passover, the night we came out of Egypt. And of course, they started getting ready to go out at night, but you go out and try to move 3.2 million Jews anywhere. It's not going to happen too fast because they really, by the time everybody was actually getting on their feet with their bags, with their packs, with their animals, with their children, everything, it was more like sunrise, and they were on their way, leaving the most famous iniquity, shall we say, committed against the people by Pharaoh, to the most famous exodus and redemption of any people in history, the Jewish people. Now, that number 7 represents, of course, 7 emotional qualities in the soul that represent the right arm, the left arm, the chest, the 2 thighs, the covenant, the I'm looking for a nice word for the mechanisms of reproduction, and of course the covenant, which is God's personal gift to the Jewish people, that we have this covenant, especially in the sexual realm, because that's where the most energy is gathered, and that's why that energy has to be lifted up. Now, those 7 items on the Passover plate also represent those 7 qualities, those 7, we call them emotive qualities, emotional qualities, because they are what move emotions, emotion, right? Like, that's probably been used before, right? But the idea as energy in motion is that's what an emotion is. Because emotions don't last. They come and they go. You're happy, suddenly you're unhappy. You're sad, suddenly you become happy. You're angry, suddenly you relax, you get over it. Emotions are on the move. Emotion. The 7 traits that are represented in the torso of the human being, which are 7 layers of the emotive soul, they're represented in the 7 items that are on the Haggadah, on the Passover plate. So now we can look at those in more detail another time. I'm not sure that that's going to serve us right now. But when we understand that these 7 emotive qualities, these emotional qualities, represent the 7 sefirot, and actually they represent also the 6 directions of time and space. In other words, not just north, south, east, and west, but up and down as well. Those 6 directions receive a crown, which is the covenant, the circumcision, the sign of the circumcision. The circumcision is a circular cut that represents a crown. And that crown, of course, is given to the Jewish people by virtue of having this covenant. Well, the seder plate, the crown is actually the plate itself, because there's only 6 items. But the plate itself holds all the other items. And so too, our covenant with God holds all the other qualities in check or in proper balance to each other. See, if I don't have a crown, which means I don't have a relationship with God, I don't have an agreement with God, then the power of kindness will go too far, and the power of gevurah will go too far, and the lust of beauty will go. Every trait will not have its natural geder, its natural boundary to keep it in balance with all the others. And when people lose that balance, that's when you'll see emotional and mental illness in all types of ways, because they have lost the boundaries of the appropriate use of those 7 emotional powers. Now, this is something we see in psychology a lot. In my practice, I try to integrate the understandings of psychology with Kabbalah, because they're totally integratable when we understand how they're connected. Now, this connection also is reflected in how the maturity of a person follows a path. And the path is that we take the highest level energy, the mind, and we bring the ideas of the mind, the good ideas of the mind, which we receive those ideas from the Torah. That power of the mind comes down into the 7 emotive traits. And then from there, they're expressed into the world through our hands, through our feet, and perhaps mostly through our mouth. That's why the mouth, the hands, and the feet are all aspects of what's called kingship, malchut, the seventh sphera, which is the seder plate, which is this power of taking energy and turning it into something in the world. Malchut is the bridge between the spiritual and the physical, between the emotional and the realistic or the material world. But it all begins in the mind. That energy of Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat are intellectual powers that integrate with and affect and influence our emotional qualities. And the two of those together join to bring about action in the physical world, which happens chiefly, of course, through our hands, our feet, and our mouths. So there is this development of power that's taking place in order to get a human being to be able to do what he needs to do in this world. And of course, the rabbis spell it out for us very easily that man was created in order to fear Hashem, and we're given the Torah in order that we're able to learn how to be in awe, proper awe of Hashem. And why? Because the Torah, Rabbi Nachman says, is all midot. It's all numbers. If you look in the Torah, you'll see that it's replete with numbers, and all those numbers represent boundaries. And with those boundaries, we can find the genius of God, and we can find our own connection to that genius, and hopefully we can follow it and live it and share it into the world. Okay. And so when we talk about the number 7, of course, then there's so many other references in Judaism. In the Haggadah, we understand that the holiday is 7 days. It starts on Passover and it goes into Chol HaMoed, and then it ends with Shvi'i Shel Pesach, the 7th day of Pesach. Now, the 7th day of Pesach, why is it so important? Because that's the day that the Jewish people experienced the greatest miracle of all time, the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, the Yam Suf, which is colloquially called the Red Sea, but it's not a very accurate appellation unless you want to argue with historians about the copper quantity in the water in Egypt at that time, which is an interesting phenomenon. But we're not going to go over to the scientific theories about how they try to take away the miraculous quality of the 10 plagues in Egypt. And they'll show you all the plagues are actually physically possible, most likely happened according to the physical realm and not according to the miraculous. And this is unfortunately, Rabbi Nachman says also in Likutei Moharan, that this is what the deniers of the Torah do. They don't just sit back with their life of denying God and denying Torah. They have to attack the Torah and attack it. And one way to try to do it is the michaseh, to cover over the miracle. It wasn't really a split of sea. It was just a very shallow body, a delta of water, a few feet deep. The wind blew all night, like the Torah says, and they walked across the delta. But that doesn't really explain everything else that happened, how the Egyptians didn't experience the same miracle, and how the waves came back and covered them over and drowned them. And that's just very simple. So whenever you hear a scientific, an anthropological person or a archaeological person or anybody, and I respect all these disciplines to a degree, but when they enter the realm of Torah, they're they're leaving their pay grade. They're leaving their experiential capacity to measure God's interaction with the world. And that's what we do. When we see the miracles of the structure of creation, the fact, for example, I just thought of one of the small ones, it seems small, maybe it's not so small, is that to the human eye, which is only one eye of billions of other eyes in the creatures of this world, the human eye perceives and measures that the width of the disk of the moon is exactly the width of the disk of the sun, creating the potential for a perfect lunar and solar eclipse. And yet we're talking about objects that are placed, well, we said 93 million miles away is the sun, and the earth, I believe, is 186,000 miles from the moon. And yet all those numbers work out to create the perfect equivalents of the sun and the moon according to the human eye, which should teach us something very important to God. I can make anything any way I want, but I want to make it important to you. I want to show you that I'm behind this creation by showing you how precise I am with size and shape and number of everything around you. That if the air in the atmosphere of the earth was a little richer with oxygen or a little bit less with oxygen, we would die. We would not be able to breathe air. Or if the balance of water to earth and the planet was not exactly as it is, it would either restore the planet to being all water, or the, the planet would, the sun would evaporate all the heat, would evaporate the waters of the earth. So the perfect balance of all the creative features of this world that we live in is designed to show us through the synchronicity of the numbers how Hashem really is at work in this world. A very famous one, of course, is we have this name Shin Dalet Yud Shaddai, which corresponds again to the covenant, to the Brit, which is called the Yesod and Malchut together in the Sfirot, in the map of the human soul. And that name, Shin Dalet Yud, has a gematria of 314. Well, what happens when you take 314 and you put a dot after the 3? You get the number pi, which is a miraculous number because it's used to measure space in a circle and in a sphere and in triangles and in all types of geometric shapes. Why is it miraculous even more? Because that name, Shin Daled Yud, is based on the pasuk She Amar LaOlamo Dai. She, that, Amar LaOlamo, he said to his world, die. That's it. Stop. Stop right there, moon. Don't go any farther away. Sun, you stay right there. Don't get any bigger. If you get any bigger, you're going to burn up my earth. If you get any smaller, it's going to be too cold around here. Amar Olamodai, God is demonstrating to us his genius through the numbers of creation, that he is running the show from beginning to end, and we really have nothing to worry about except having the proper relationship with him, praising him, being in joy because of his presence is the highest joy. Even if you don't feel his presence, you can create the joy of his existence. And when God looks down and sees that all of you are happy, he says, oh, you're happy? I'll show you greater happiness and greater happiness. And so too it is with all his traits, because he is the sum total of all traits, and he is the absolute quantity of all traits. So this is a beginning of our understanding of the numbers in the Haggadah, and the numbers and how God uses numbers as part of the infinite equation, infinite language of equations that create in a universal language of mathematics through which all human beings at all time can relate. Because language, of course, whether it's a numerical or a pictorial language, is still designed for communication, the communication that brings us closer to Hashem. Okay, so we're going to stop and then we're going to continue with a little meditation about these ideas. Don't go away. Okay. Let us begin, as we often begin, with the gift of life shared to us through the gift of breath. Jewish meditation is not simply learning to be relaxed, learning to center ourselves. Reaching a level of stasis with the universe is certainly a beautiful thing. But Jewish meditation understands that those gifts of relaxation, of breath, of life, of union with creation are only preparations for a higher gift, the gift of God's knowledge for us, the gift of knowing that He knows us better, perhaps, not even perhaps, better than we can ever know ourselves. Because most of us have been here before, according to the Kabbalah. Reincarnation is called the greatest mercy of all God's mercies. And so we are here now in the space of attempting inner peace with the knowledge that inner peace draws us deeper into the universe, draws the universe out from within the unconscious to the conscious level. So breathe deeply through your noses. Feel the cool air calm the fire of the mind. The cool breath enters the lungs, calms the fires of the heart. Each breath becomes longer, deeper, easier, less hurried, less stressful. Each breath is another step towards greater peace, greater understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Let your body relax. We don't even know where we're holding on too tight. Let our heads fall easily where they may. Let our shoulders sink. Let our hands open receptively without any stress, even in our fingertips. Let our wrists and elbows also find their restful posture. Let our spine, the blessing of a spine that holds us erect, holds us higher than the animals, holds our minds, the satellite of our perception, straight and tall, to receive what there is to receive in the world around us. Let all of these qualities come together through long, deep breath. In a few weeks, we will be celebrating the festival of Pesach, Passover. It is a time of greatness of consciousness, a time of seeing the oneness of all creation and seeing the diversity of all creation, how they are really one symbiotic system of life giving life back to itself. As the line follows itself in a figure 8 back to itself, so too the energies of heaven enter the human being, circulate through his body, return back to heaven, chiefly through our speech. Do not discount one word that emerges from our mouths. We do not know the power of our speech, especially when we are one with creation in a conscious way versus the unconscious level. Inhale and exhale the past. Inhale and exhale the future. Leave behind the residue of remorse, the residue of regret. Leave it far behind. And exhale the fears of the future. They are not here and they are not real. They are gone and they need not come into our lives. For all we have is the now. And the now is where we meet God. We meet our Creator here and now. In our words, in His words, in our pulse, the pulse of the universe, in the numbers of our lives, the numbers of creation. Continue breathing. The gift of life is on your breath, just as the information of who you are is on your breath and in your blood and even in your hair. The information of life is encoded into our being and expressing itself outward through the way we move through God's world. Ask yourself, do you have a favorite number? If not, perhaps you would choose one. If you have many, so may they be important to your life. But your favorite number is most likely a gateway of your experience, of your history, of your genetics, of your family, of your tribe, of your continent. Our numbers are the encoding of our information on this planet. Imagine you have no age. You are neither old nor young. neither wise nor innocent, neither wise of knowledge or ignorant of knowledge. Imagine the true zero that represents nothing, but nothing that transcends all the something that surrounds us. The nothing of the zero is the gateway to the true something. The true something is the infinite light that continues to pour itself and pulse itself and wave itself and particleize itself into the physical world which we live. Let this knowledge not be separate from you. It is you. And how do we receive new knowledge? With the arrogance of facts or the humility of the gravity, the humility of the indescribable infinity of existence. Continue breathing. You have no age now. You have no number except the number closest to your heart. Imagine your bank account. Do you know how much is in your bank account? From moment to moment, you can check. Imagine a world without money, where you don't need money. What kind of freedom would that be? Without all the numbers and the calculations that we expend in the pursuit and the collection and the guarding, the spending of money. All of it gone. Zero. No need. For in the ultimate abundance of the world to come, there is no money. There's no measuring, no numerology of money, no worship of money. All those numbers simply disappear. Are we ready for that freedom? Are we ready to inhabit that realm here in a world dominated by numbers? Let it be in our days. Let heaven arrive on earth with peace and mercy and grace and kindness and patience, without any of the apocalyptic, without any of the doomsday attached to it at all. Breathe the life free of numbers, and then you become the master of your numbers. Breathe that number. Breathe that place above numbers, above time, above space, above the size of anything that you might measure in this world. It is all attached to the material. Would it be that our numbers measure the greatness of God? Impossible to measure. The greatness of Torah, the greatness of the righteous. the greatness of creation? Would it be that we reach the true equality of man through the vision, God's idea of true equality? Amen. So I hope this meditation has reached you in a good place in your life. And even if not, God forbid, perhaps this meditation can help bring you back to a good place in your life. I want to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom and a peaceful approach of Pesach in all your preparations to leave our exile once and for all. Shabbat Shalom.